Welcome to the Business Podcast, where we interview professionals across all industries. Hey, it's Iman. Welcome back. Today we have Dr. Colleen Georges, a coach, author, professor, and mom of a 12-year-old son. Colleen, it's great to have you here with us today. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much, Iman, for having me here today.
Absolutely. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself and, in particular, a couple things that most people might not know.
Oh, I like that question. um, a little bit about me. So I've been doing life and career coaching, have my own business for almost 13 years now. It started out as a little side hustle back when I was a full-time higher education administrator. I used to work full-time at Rutgers University, running programs for low-income first-generation students. And I had a whole career in higher ed before I started my business as a part-time gig. And then it's been just about 11 years that I've been doing this full-time. And then aside from my coaching, I also, of course, wrote a book, which was a lifelong dream. And I'm a mom. I have a son who is 12. He just turned 12 a couple of weeks ago. And I think he's, the coolest human that ever lived. And things that people don't know about me, I always think one funny little story that comes to mind is when I was I think it was my mid-20s, I was shopping in one of my local malls, and I don't even remember what I was there for, but I heard singing. And this was a time in my life where, like, if there was karaoke going on the weekend, that's where I was. So I hear singing in the mall, and like my body just like walked towards it. And this was when Britney Spears was like really, really big. And the mall was hosting, because she had this big HBO special coming out at the time, they were hosting like a massive karaoke contest in the mall. And I like dropped everything I was doing, entered the contest, and I actually was one of, out of thousands of people that entered that day, one of the people that won. So I think that's a pretty crazy story.
It sounds like it. Absolutely. Well, congrats on your success. It seems like if you've been doing things 13 years and been independent 11 years, that it only took you 2 years to ramp up and move from your professor role into just full-time coaching. Is that an accurate depiction?
Yeah, just about. So I teach now. I wasn't teaching at the time. I was basically running programs for students. So I was like doing counseling, advising, directing different like programs, like tutoring programs, but I still teach. And that's like my little part-time gig. I teach like a class a semester, and I do teach at Rutgers, and I teach a women's leadership / social justice course for undergraduate students. So that's my little side gig. But yeah, I flipped it. So it used to be I was in higher ed full time. After 2 years, I transitioned to run my business full time and teach part time. So yeah, it took about 2 years.
Very cool. Maybe you could talk a little bit about your thought process entering academia or entering college and deciding your specialization, which led you into higher ed.
Yeah, so I knew when I was probably a teenager that the two things that I really loved were writing and helping people. And so it was kind of a toss up at that point when I was thinking about, like most of us thinking about going to college, like what am I going to choose? And ultimately, I ended up choosing to major in psychology, thinking that I would probably do some writing down the road as well. And I kind of knew it would be in the self-help arena. That was definitely what I was more drawn to. And I thought, okay, well, I'll go to graduate school. I'll become, a licensed counselor. And I kind of stuck with the plan to a degree, although interestingly, when I started out, the plan was I wanted to work with either work at a psychiatric institute or be a prison psychologist, because I was actually really, really fascinated with abnormal psychology. And clearly I went in a very, very different direction. And the reason was when I was, I guess about a junior and a senior, I started a job part-time working with teenagers who were in foster care. And I had a job that was called a therapeutic assistant. It was like, $8 an hour, but it'll still be one of the best jobs I've ever had in my whole life. And I did it for about 2 years. And I met a lot of teens who just had just a lot of really, really awful, rough things going on in their lives. And it was, again, one of the most rewarding things I've ever done. And it led me to think maybe I wanted to work with teens or do family therapy. So when I started grad school, I asked my advisor, you know, do you know of any opportunities around campus where I might be able to work with teens and families? And she said to me, well, I don't know anything about that, but my friend and colleague over at Rutgers Career Services is looking for an intern. And that was in 1998. It was my first job ever working with college students doing career counseling, and it obviously changed my life.
That is definitely an impact that it had in terms of your outlook. So thanks
Yeah.
for sharing that. In terms of the work that you do presently, what have been some of the successes that come to mind?
I think some of the things that come to mind, a lot of the work I do is career based. So while I do life coaching as well. A lot of that coaching comes in conjunction with career coaching. So I think the things that always get me the most excited is when, well, certainly when clients of mine move up within their careers and land opportunities, that many times they've been dreaming about for years. But I think one of the things that really excites me that I do a lot of is working with folks who, just kind of fell into a job, which is the phrase that a lot of people use. It's like, I didn't really know what I wanted to do in college. And, when I graduated, my sister's friend, told me about this opportunity at this company and I took it and I've been doing it for 15 years, but I've never really liked it. Now I want to figure out what I really want to do with my life. And so that's a pretty common story. And I think my favorite experiences with clients are helping them to find what they love and really like explore based on personal things that they've done or or recreational things they've done, or even just, the things that they have enjoyed in the workplace, whether it was like for a part-time job when they were younger, or something they do like about work that they've done full time and a particular project that they liked, or something even short term, and then trying to turn that either in some cases, maybe into a small business or a side hustle, because I very much believe in that. And, in other cases to help them make a transition into a new field, which is definitely no easy feat. It takes time. It takes, making little small steps along the way. You can't just kind of leap from one thing into another. Although I will say that I have had clients who have leapt from one thing into another successfully. I think of a client of mine who had been a paralegal for 15 years and, had this idea that she wanted to do something to help people. And we were able to transition her into working in higher education because that was something that she had considered. And I've had people who've, again, also made transitions from industries into a very, very different industry. Those are the things that get me the most excited. But the other things that really I think I love are just when I have clients, because a lot of my work and my book is very much about, goal setting, but self-talk is really at the core. So when I see, just speaking with a client this morning, for instance, we're really working on, just creating boundaries and feeling, in this client's case, feeling a sense of, I'm good enough and worthwhile enough, even if I'm not busy all the time. And it's okay if I take time for myself. And when she was able to say to me that she chose not to do something and she didn't feel guilty about it, that, those moments are a big deal to me when people are able to shift the conversations they have with themselves and treat themselves with more respect.
What about the opposite? Difficult clients.
I've had a few here and there, not too many, thank goodness. I've been very lucky, I will say. The difficult clients happen more at the beginning of when I started my business. I think that something something that shifted for me was I learned to, and I would imagine that a lot of service-based business owners can probably relate to this. I learned to trust my gut better. I think that oftentimes we have a gut reaction even when someone reaches out via email, that something in the words, the way somebody says something, it's like something in you whispers, this seems like this might be a difficult person to work with. And, in the beginning, I didn't listen to those little whispers, and I was almost always right in that gut reaction. So something that's changed for me very quickly was I learned, if I'm getting any sort of vibe via email or in a first conversation, I'm open to saying, I don't know if maybe we would be the right fit, or if, our relationship would be the right fit for you. Or, giving people other options. But I think that I remember back to when I was a new mom, and again, it was probably the first year or two that I had transitioned to doing the business full time. And my son was, he was a baby, and he was kind of yelling in the background. And I remember this client who had just taken on this coaching client. And of course, I'm sure it was frustrating to hear a kid yelling, but I remember the person said, "Can't you just give him a toy and put him in a room and shut the door?" And that was, I think that was actually the transitional moment where I realized that I needed to really vet my clients as much as they would vet their coach. But in terms of difficult, the only other difficult thing that I would say for me has been experiences where I'm working with someone, and I know, like, I can see what's possible, but when they realize how much work, that this is personal work that it requires to make certain personal or professional shifts, that they may not have the faith in themselves, or they may think, I don't know if I have time for this, or, whatever might happen where they just kind of disappear. And I think that's the stuff that bothers me, when you see what's possible for someone, but they don't stay.
That leads into an interesting idea around what kind of advice you give clients that generally has taken them longer to apply, and it shouldn't have necessarily taken that long.
Hmm. Oof. You know, I think sometimes things that are relational in nature, um, things related to communication, are sometimes the hardest, particularly if related to people we work with closely, or that we're married to or in a relationship with, or parents. And when I say parents, I don't mean just, young folks and their parents, but, I mean, people who are much older and still having very challenged relationship with their parents, which isn't uncommon. I think relational types of issues and communication issues can be very complex and very difficult to make changes, because a lot of the time, no matter how much we might talk about this in coaching, there's kind of, an expectation that still remains, that if I change, the other person's going to change. If I begin to shift my behaviors, that person's going to shift their behaviors, which of course we don't control other people. Um, and when we make behavioral changes, it's really about protecting ourselves, and as I call it, not breathing in the poison, right? So if you've got a toxic work relationship or a toxic personal relationship, learning not to sort of, walk into a room filled with poison, go and just like breathe it all in. So I think those things, can take a while. But at the same time, I see people, take a couple steps forward, and then sometimes take, maybe, quite a few steps back, because it's really hard to break those types of patterns. And then also, certainly, I think with career related changes, it's expected that a big career change is going to take a while. But I think that one of the things that, will sometimes, I guess, not so much surprise me, because I think there's so much fear associated that even if we don't like something, we're used to it. I know this difficulty. Like, so even if I know this hurts me and I'm unhappy in this job, it's familiar to me. So sometimes even when we get to the point where the person's like, okay, I've explored, I've, done some of this foundation work, and I've got a new resume ready to go, but won't apply for the jobs. And weeks go by. We've been working so hard, and this person's been doing amazing, been so on top of like all these action steps. But then when it comes to actually putting the applications out there, or trying to reach out to these contacts to say, okay, do you have any opportunities? This is what I'm looking for. That's where we get stopped and kind of stuck. So that's another thought that comes to mind.
Most definitely. So if we look into what you've written in your most recent book, what are some of the core takeaways? What inspired you to write it? And of course, without giving too much away.
So, so when I first started writing, I did a lot of writing for, I would like for anthology books. So I would write a chapter, in multiple different anthology books, and that's how I kind of started out. So there was a career book, about different, methods and careers I wrote for. That was the first one. And then there was a really great one called the Contagious Optimism series by an amazing guy, David Mezzapelle. I wrote chapters in the 2 books of his series. And then my coach, Linda Joy, I wrote chapters in a number of her anthology series. That's kind of how I started out. And then finally had I guess I would call it, bravery, or got out of my own way. I'm sure many authors can relate to that in one way or another, to in 2019 publish my first solely written book, which is called RESCRIPT: The Story You're Telling Yourself. The 8 practices to quiet your inner antagonist, amplify your inner advocate, and author a limitless life. And that was really too long in the works. I joke that it took me 16 years to write it, but there wasn't much writing going on in those 16 years. There's a lot more not writing and thinking about it going on. But what really led me to start writing this book, and write a book in that sort of genre and space, is that I myself struggled with anxiety and really, really nasty negative self-talk and self-esteem issues, and panic attacks for several years. I would say throughout high school, throughout college, and part of my graduate school career. That was when the panic attacks started, and I really wanted to write something that resonated with my own experiences and the things that, or I should say practices and strategies that I utilize to overcome and sort of triumph over my own challenges in life, and the things that I really then utilize to work with my clients and my students over the years. And that's where this book was born out of. It was in an effort to try to give people tools to change the conversation that they have with themselves, to be one that's more self-compassionate and more empowering, and helps them, basically move towards their personal and professional goals instead of getting stuck or running in the opposite direction.
That makes total sense. With that in mind, what's getting you excited these days?
Hmm. So I'm currently working on, I don't even know what to call it. It's kind of, it's not quite books, but there's things in it that are, again, in the same vein, but I'm working on like a goal planner um, that has like strategies for creating routines in your life, um, strategies for moving towards your goals. Because I have an entire chapter in my book that's really about fear of failure and kind of, I guess you'd say, imposter syndrome, and basically how do we shift the way that we, even the language that we use when we're setting goals for ourselves, and to move towards something positive versus run away from something negative. So a lot of times, let's say, for instance, a student might say, I don't want to fail this exam, but that's like a really, what do we say? Kind of a negative way to state a goal, right? It's like we're trying not to do this bad thing. So to instead have a goal that maybe is more about like, I want to get an A on this exam, or I want to do really well on this exam. So, but again, being clear and trying to give people strategies and resources to set goals for themselves, create new habits in their life, create routines that help them, slowly on a daily basis, create little wins and little successes that move them towards larger goals that they have for themselves personally and professionally. So I've been working on this goal planner for a few months now, still kind of, I suspect I'll have it out in the next few months. And in conjunction with that, I've also been working on a gratitude journal, because that's practicing gratitude was one of the things that changed my life, that I started, doing back in the year 2000, a nightly gratitude practice. So what, 21 years now I've been practicing gratitude in the evening and really throughout my day. And that was one of the things that really helped me to eradicate anxiety and panic from my own life. So my final, one of my final chapters in my book is on gratitude and thinking thankfully. So I've been working on this gratitude journal, and each of them have, quotes and research studies for each of the 52 weeks of the year. I've got research to kind of like, like how, what does the research kind of support and say about, in one case goals, and in another case gratitude, and just some strategies and resources for folks. So those are the two things I'm excited about right now.
It's definitely an area of personal enrichment that is extraordinarily valuable for those who tap into it, for sure. So thanks for
Yeah,
sharing that.
thank you.
Now, if we could switch gears for a moment and take into account that you are, uh, fortunate enough to have had a technical background in knowledge creation from your education, how has that helped shape your approach to your writing? That idea came to
Ooh,
mind as you were speaking just now. And how do you
yeah.
think that kind of informs some of the ideas you present, which might be familiar to some readers and might not be?
That's a great question, because I think that one of the most challenging aspects for me in writing, and one of the things that, I should say, one of the many things that made the process of writing made it take a long time for me, as well as, again, little ways I got in my own way in the process, was I was used to academic writing, getting a master's and a doctoral degree. This is all very academic, research-based writing. And I love research. Like, I, by nature, will research the heck out of anything. Like if I'm buying a product, I'm going to be all over like, Amazon reviews, and like, I mean, no matter what I'm doing, I love to look things up, and I just love research. I love research studies. I love journal articles. So, and I'm so used to, I should say, so used to writing in an academic way that, you're taught, and I would imagine that you may have heard this at some point too. It's almost like when you're writing a paper and you're featuring other people's, again, studies, we were taught, that it's like everybody's already had all the ideas. These ideas aren't your own. You're just synthesizing them and putting them together. So it's like, make sure you cite your sources and things like that. I had a hard time just really using my own voice, using just being able to say I, and just allowing my own thoughts, my own strategies, my own, things that I created. That was the hardest thing for me. And I took a course, I took a lot of different courses, but one course that I took, the instructor had said to me, you know, Colleen, you have your own ideas, like really, it was about book writing. You have your own ideas. Yes, of course, you've read all these great, you've great articles and all this research, but you have their own strategies you use with your own clients. Why are you so stuck talking about the research instead of talking about what you know and just writing from your heart? And that was a major turning point for me. That was around 2000, and I want to say 2016-ish. That was when the writing really, began to flow for me in a very, very different way. When I let go of the idea that it had to be like all research and all academic speak. And I think that has, informed the way I write, but I learned how to sort of be the academic and be the coach and the person simultaneously. And that was hard for me.
Well, thank you for sharing that. That's really good to have a glimpse into your thought process and those experiences. When it comes to a next work that you might be contemplating, what ideas, topics, themes have come across? And I ask that with confidence because it's very common that authors have many ideas of what they want to write about, and they kind of have to boil them down to one to focus on, and then keep the ideas on the backlog until they revisit them again. So curious what's been on your mind or has been on your mind.
You hit that on the head. I'm sure in talking with lots of authors, you hear that a lot. There's always lots of things sort of floating around. The things floating around in my mind, one has always been, especially because I teach a women's leadership course, I have a women's, sort of empowerment book in my head, and I've started the writing process. I created like a quiz for it, but it's still in its very early stages, and I also, I would say, you have to pick the direction, because when you have all these sort of like, I could do this and I could do that and I like this and I like that, sort of sticking with one thing, and then like letting the others go is sometimes a grander part of the challenge. But one of the other things I started working on was, really kind of like, I call it like a book of like mini manifestos. And like, I like to write kind of like one page, I guess you could call them like affirmational statements, but it's like a collection of affirmational statements. Some folks call them like manifesto, but they're like tiny, like a page long. And I really wanted to create a book that had just little mini manifestos for various things that we go through in our lives. That would be almost like one page. You could read it, and just kind of feel like, okay, I got this. And I really wanted to do that for a variety of different things. Just, resilience, getting through tough times, forgiveness, dealing with adversity, dealing with challenging relationships, just a variety of different topics. So I had started writing a few of those. So that's something. But I think that after I do my gratitude journal and the goal planner resources and put them out there, I really want to come back to something that just before the pandemic was coming to closer fruition, which was a book that my son and I wrote together. So it's done, and it's called Thankful Theo, and it's meant to be a children's book one of a children's book series about different sort of character traits, positive character development. So like a kid kind of like struggling in this case to deal with being thankful. Like many kids are kind of focused on, they want the phone and they want the iPad and the video game and the sneakers or whatever. So it's really focused on, a little boy who's struggling to be grateful and what sort of helps him make that transition. So he and I, my son and I, Josh, wrote that together a couple of summers ago. And we had a wonderful young woman who was our illustrator. We were meeting with her and getting in the thick of it, and then Corona hit. So that's the next thing I want to come back to.
Very cool. Yeah, that sounds like something with reading. In terms of some additional successes that you've had with your book and your coaching,
Yeah.
what else can you share?
With the book, it's funny. Some of the successes are the obvious, like measurable ones. I was, very blessed that um, that the book won between 2019 and 2020. I won eight book awards, which was really cool. A very, I would say call that like a very validating experience. So those are, like I said, the sort of more measurable ones. But I think, you know, it's it's often the ones where someone reaches out to you and tells you that they read your book and it changed their life. Those moments are pretty amazing. Or when my clients are reading my book and, they say, I just read this chapter and, I started doing X and it's really working. Or, you know, I think, my students decide to buy my book too. And, whether it's my students or clients or people that I've, met that have read the book who said that it felt like I was talking directly to them, that they felt so alone in this, the way they felt about, some particular thing. But then when they read, the introduction or a particular chapter, or in some cases, just the entire book, just had a feeling of, I guess, being understood and feeling like they weren't the only person who had this, like, as I call it, an inner antagonist, sort of nasty critic in their head, evaluating them all the time and shutting them down and talking them down all the time. I think those are they're less sort of measurable successes, but they're the ones that, I don't know, I guess you could kind of say make you tear up. And then professionally, one of the greatest things about doing coaching work is, I feel like, in regular life, you have like your own things, right? Again, we're talking about our own, our own successes. Like, hey, you win book awards and it feels really cool. I feel like as a coach, I don't just get to have my successes, but I get my clients' successes. And in some cases, I I think I get just as excited as they do. So, like, for instance, two of my clients, I have two clients that started new jobs on Monday, right? So it's Wednesday, so like that gets like when I go through the interview process with clients and we're preparing for the interview, you're like, and when you've traveled with them the whole way, both personally and professionally, and you know how hard it was for them to get to this place, and then they're going on these interviews, and and then they get a job offer, and like I said, I have two clients that started new jobs this past Monday, and just that's I can't explain it, like the joy that I get from that. And one of my clients, like, literally in days leading up, and in the last few days, it's like she's sending me text messages, and she's like, look at this, and they did this, welcome breakfast for me, and look at this, they sent me this t-shirt, and to be part of the team, and she's just so just elated, and it's just, for me, that's just such pure joy. And this morning I had a client going on an interview, and or wait, no, excuse me, it was yesterday morning, right? Today's the 5th, yesterday morning. So I, in the morning, because I knew he was going on an interview at 3 o'clock yesterday. I sent may the 4th be with you on your interview today. So those are really great successes when my clients are successful.
That's really, really awesome. If you could go into a time machine to any point in history and be someone's best friend, who would it be? And what would you do with them for an afternoon?
Oh my God. That's like a really good question. Oh God, you got me. I'm going to tell you the person that came to mind, but this person's still alive. Um, she's still going. Betty White is one of my idols, and but she's what, I think 98 or 99 now, so it's not so much time machine because she's still with us, thank goodness. But she's somebody that I would love to spend an afternoon with. Like I'm really blown away by one, the fact that she is in her, late 90s and still witty as ever. She's a philanthropist. She's good to people. She's good to animals. She's had this successful career. She's a strong woman, but also just very feminine too, and just very much someone who, she set the rules. She decided what she would and wouldn't put up with in Hollywood, and she created her own path, and she did things her own way. And just I think there's just so many things I'm really blown away by: her intelligence, her humor, her heart, and just that she's maintained relevance in people's lives and hearts through her entire career, to start out in her, I want to say, her late teens, early 20s, and to still be a person that people know and revere, still to this day. That she's somebody that I would love to spend time with.
Absolutely. Well, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. And of course, we're going to have to do this again. But until then, maybe you could share a parting thought.
A parting thought, I would say, Ivan, I think that if we could all be more focused on giving ourselves compassion the way that we might give others compassion. I think that many human beings find it, I wouldn't say always easy, but so much easier to give their kindness to others, and be there for a friend or even a stranger in a time of need. But then when they go through a difficult experience or make a mistake, are the first to just beat themselves up over it and feel guilt and shame, and hang on to that, and have that one moment really influence so much more of their future. I would just say, if we could all give as much compassion to ourselves as we would give to a friend.
Phenomenal. Until we talk soon, all the best. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Ima. It's been so much fun talking with you.
Thanks for attending the Business Podcast, and stay tuned for more episodes.